Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Feet on the Soil podcast, the podcast about the world beneath our feet and how we interact with it. I just want to start off this episode by saying thank you. This podcast is something I've really wanted to do for a long time, and I got a really nice reception to the first episode. I got some really nice messages. I had some people talking to me in person, and it was just really nice. So I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for a nice introduction. Now that our introduction episode is out of the way, we can start getting into some interesting topics. I said in the first episode that this one would be about something interesting, and to me it is. We're going to be talking about romanticization in rewilding, something that I'm definitely quite guilty of. We'll start by going over exactly what is rewilding. I'm going to give a brief history of wilderness and the wild, because if we're going to return to the wild, we have to kind of know what it is. We'll be looking at conservation versus creation in rewilding. And then we'll look at a few positive examples. I'm going to be putting down rewilding a little bit at points, and I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. And then we'll wrap it up then. So we'll get started. Rewilding as a concept is something that's really taken off in the last few years. It's a pretty amazing idea. We take a degraded landscape that serves very little value to nature. We leave it for a few years, and all of a sudden we come back to a beautiful natural landscape. Sounds amazing. We've seen it happen, but in most cases the landscape has been so altered, and there are so many keystones missing from the landscape that the regeneration, it just can't really happen. The wilderness has always fascinated people. It's gone by different names, but humans innately are nature, and so we are fascinated by it. We love the idea of being out in the wilds. We love the idea of that real rugged lifestyle. And back when we were early humans, the wilderness was something to be feared. I can walk around the Wicklow Mountains, and the scariest thing is ticks, and then some people are afraid of badgers because they think they're going to break their legs if they bite onto them. But that's the scariest thing I can think of, and it's not especially intimidating. 500 or 600 years ago, I could walk around the Wicklow Mountains, and my main fears would be wolves, other humans, or boar. And then you go back further and you'd even have bear to worry about. So the wilderness always had this sort of element of fear, but with that fear came respect. You're not going to go trudging loudly through a forest, screaming, shouting, and whistling your favourite song if you know that behind the corner could be a bear or a wolf. And because of this and many other reasons, the wilderness was always an extension of self. Humans are animals, humans are nature, there is no separation. And the wilderness was just like us. There was no good or bad, it just was. It was nature. And our valuing of landscape can also be seen in our language. A lot of languages, Indo-Germanic or Sanskrit or Irish, they have really close ties to the landscape. I know it can be said for Ireland for sure, and I'm 99% sure it can be said for the rest of the world. But our place names are nearly always in relation to what animals were found there, what trees, or how the water moves, or what colour the water is, or the topography. It's all landscape based. That's changed a lot in recent years, of course, but the old names for areas are usually tied to the land, which shows even more how landscape was so important to us. Of course, this faded over a long period of time. There was many elements, but one of the big elements was the age of exploration and colonialism. Both of these worked because a divide could be made between nature and man, between land and man. In this era, we really believed we had conquered nature. We had built huge boats which could cross the uncrossable seas. We had defeated diseases, we had beat the cold, we had wiped animals from areas. In the minds of many, humans had beaten nature. We had won. And with this, there became the civilized area, and there was the wilderness, anywhere outside of the city or village. And then came along the Romantic era. This era saw painters, poets, songwriters create the image of the wilderness that we have now. This pure, pristine, and in that era quite godly image of serenity. The wilderness stopped being nature. It stopped being feared, and it became more of a gallery. Nature was something to admire, which it should be, but then you could return to your city, to civil life, quote unquote. And then came the urge to conquer more. I think one of the best examples of this is Theodore Roosevelt, the American president. He was known as an outdoorsman and kind of represents the modern idea of masculinity. If you look up Theodore Roosevelt on Google, you don't have to do too much scrolling to find him posed with a rifle next to an elephant or lion or rhino with a big grin underneath his mustache, while he proclaimed he loved the outdoors and he loved nature. He didn't love it to admire it, he loved it to conquer it. He was a hunter and a hiker, and represented the new idea of man's relation to nature. I say all this because, at its core, rewilding is the return to wild. But wild is a strange word. And if we're returning something to the wild, we have to really know what the wild is. All over the world, species have been wiped out, invasive species have been introduced, and the landscape is completely different to what it would have been naturally. Because of this, if we take a plot of land and simply walk away, chances are, between invasive species and the lack of keystone species, it will not regenerate in the way it should. A great example of this in Ireland would be the wild Neffen. This was a huge area of land in Mayo that was handed over from Coillte, which are Ireland's national forestry body, to the state. And the intention was to create the largest area of wilderness in Ireland, which sounds great. It's obviously a benefit to both people and to nature. But the way they did it was a little bit messy. The plan was lock the gates, walk away, and let nature do its thing. Now, the area in this national park had been pretty extensively farmed, mainly sheep, and also mined for peat, for fuel. This left a lot of bare peat soil, which is really acidic. And a problem that had already happened was the introduction of Rhododendron ponticum, an ornamental shrub brought up from the Himalayas, which loves acidic soil and thrives in the west of Ireland. This plant very, very quickly took over huge areas in Mayo. And the problem with it is, its leaves are poisonous to mammals, its berries are poisonous to mammals, and only a few birds can actually eat its berries. It also reproduces rapidly and grows incredibly fast. So all of this led to a rapid expansion of rhododendron in these areas. You also had sheep, which, although they're so synonymous with Ireland and with especially the uplands in Ireland, they are technically a non-native species. They were brought over in, I believe, around the 1600s by the Normans, and ever since have been a little bit of a problem. Sheep themselves in low intensities are absolutely fine, but in the high numbers we see that now, because of EU grants in the past, they can be quite damaging to the landscape. The other thing would be non-native deer, like sicas mainly. These will graze new trees and stop forest regeneration. All of these things together led to Wild Neffen never really living up to its wild name. Now, lately, in fairness, the OPW and National Parks and Wildlife Services, among a few other bodies, have stepped up and created a really solid plan for the regeneration of wild Neffen. Sheep fences have gone up and deer fences in certain areas. Rhododendron has started to be cleared, but all of this is a really long process. And what I'm getting at is even the most wild parts of Ireland and much of the world just are not the way they used to be. And they really need a plan in order to become what they once were. They can't just be left to their own devices, not in the state that we've left them. And this brings us to conservation rewilding versus creation rewilding. These are kind of arbitrary terms. I've kind of just invented them myself. I'm sure that they've been used in the past, but creation rewilding seems to be the thing that's really taking a hold at the moment. Take an area, plant what you would assume to be native trees, throw a few seed bombs in, and you're away. You've got a woodland in 15 years. Unfortunately, this isn't the case. Ecosystems need really specific conditions to develop, and nature knows best where to put them. That's why the small areas of high quality ecosystem that we have are the most important areas. These are the places that need conservation rewilding. So even a woodland that maybe looks very degraded, looks like it might be nearly beyond our help, within that soil is the mycelial network and the seed bank of a healthy, developed woodland. So rather than taking an area of what would have been a healthy grassland and turning it into a woodland or forest, we should take the areas that are already just waiting to explode, waiting to go, and essentially allow them to rewild themselves, to develop themselves and spread from there. A great example of this would be Knepp. Knepp is always brought up in rewilding conversations just because it's one of the major success stories. What once was an intensive dairy farm has now become an oasis of rewilding. After a few years of unsuccessful farming, the owners of Knepp decided that they had to make a change. And the change that they went for was rewilding. So their grazing patterns changed, they reduced the headcount of their cattle, and they opened up to allow the cattle to graze freely. Management was changed to stop interference as much as possible, while still clearing non-native and invasive species. And from this, and a lot of other steps, they've had some amazing results. Firstly, they've created an amazing ecotourism destination. So what once was an unprofitable dairy farm is now a profitable industry for the area, creating a huge amount of employment and also huge benefits to nature. So species that hadn't been seen in this area in decades or even centuries have returned. Plant life is thriving, soil health is incredible, and all of this from just allowing the already healthy-ish ecosystems in the area just to flourish, just to rewild themselves. There was no need for huge amounts of replanting trees, for habitat creation, or, the odd pond might have been dug out, but it was nothing too severe. And like I said, Knepp is brought up a lot because it's one of the major successes. It's not the only one. Within Ireland we have the likes of the Dunsany estate. We have various wetlands. There's Suffolk fenlands in the UK. You could consider the wolves in Yellowstone National Park to be a rewilding project. They were bringing a keystone species that had previously not been seen back into the area. You have the restoration of boars in the United Kingdom, bison in Europe, and a lot of others. Really amazing projects, and the likes of Mossy Earth posting on YouTube some incredible success stories of rewetting of areas and rewilding. So all of this isn't to say that rewilding is a bad thing, but what these projects have in common is they took something that already was there. It just needed that conservation, it just needed that little kick whether that be the reintroduction of a keystone species or the removal of an invasive, and all of a sudden it flourished. This differs from the rewilding that we see being quite popular, especially from government bodies, which is to take areas that at the moment really serve very little nature conservation value, whether this be local parks, which of course are great for songbirds and foxes and stuff like that, but for the real specialist species, they're never going to serve a huge amount of purpose. Or things like rooftop gardens or college campuses. These really can't be rewilded. They can have habitats created, but they'll never be wild. I started off this episode by saying we were going to be talking about the romanticization of rewilding. And I realised that what I've just been talking about sounds pretty romantic. I'll fully admit that. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a difference between rewilding done right and rewilding done romantically. Done romantically, rewilding sees all the positives and none of the negatives. If we walk away from a space, it's going to become that beautiful woodland that we see from the likes of Owen Dalton, creating an incredible landscape out in Beara Peninsula, or Knepp in England. But those two examples are examples of rewilding done right, with a huge amount of foresight, the removal of invasive species, the addition or simulation of keystone species, and a lot of thought going into them. Nature will always take care of itself, but we've done so much damage to it in recent years that it just needs that little bit of help before it can really take care of itself. Thank you.